Hey, welcome back, Ram fans. Mark from Rams up here. The doldrums of the NFL season continue. Not a lot going on in the Rams world. So, this Rams update, I'm going to share some news and notes, a little bit of commentary, and then I'm going to get into a little thing I put together, the most underappreciated Ram at each position, more or less, anyways. The guys that don't get the recognition, the notoriety I think they deserve. And man, a lot of this is quite debatable. You're probably going to disagree with me on a few guys, but hey, maybe I'll do another turn at this. Some additional guys that probably need to be recognized more for their contributions. So before we get into that, we will get into some news and notes. And the first thing I wanted to talk about on the podcast, this is episode 693. So of course we're going to talk about someone who wore number 93. And remember Ethan Westbrooks? He was a defensive end out of Oakland, went on to West Texas A&M, undrafted. The Rams signed him, played 2 years with the Rams in St. Louis, got on the plane, came back to LA with the Rams, played 3 years with the Rams here in Los Angeles, and finished out his career. Played one game with the Saints in 2021. Finished his Rams career with 9 sacks and a fumble recovery. And that fumble recovery, I went back and looked at it. That was in 2016 against the Buccaneers. Robert Quinn with the strip of Jameis Winston. It was a great play by Quinn. Could have had the sack, but went for the strip, knocked the ball loose, and Ethan Westbrook's 77 yards for the touchdown. So, for an undrafted rookie out of Oakland and West Texas A&M, not a bad little career for Ethan Westbrooks, our number 93 for the St. Louis and Los Angeles Rams. Wanted to get through some news and notes here. Mina Kimes on the Jackson Dart bandwagon, sort of, kind of anyways. She just thinks he'd be a great fit for the Rams, has all the skills, appears to have all the skills anyways to be successful at the NFL level. And Mina, who I love Mina Kimes, she's awesome. She just thinks it would be the ideal situation. Matthew Stafford's career winding down, it would so appear. Bring Jackson Dart in for a year or two to sit behind Matthew Stafford. And, the downside to this is we miss out on the opportunity to perhaps add a key contributor, because this would have to be in the first round at number 26, unless they can slide back into the second and hope he's still there, and he very well may not be available into the second round. So we lose opportunity to add an impact guy that can help us make a Super Bowl run this year, but it just puts to rest any concern, I would hope anyways, about our continuity at the quarterback position. Not that Jackson Dart's a sure thing, but I'd love to have him in our clubhouse. Sitting behind Matthew Stafford for a year, I'd feel really good about things. It'd be pretty exciting to add Jackson Dart. And, I've been talking about my concern about the backup offensive tackles, offensive line in general, but specifically offensive tackles. And SB Nation published something that basically, they're in agreement with me, and they identified 3 offensive linemen that the Rams could draft late or bring in as undrafted free agents. These guys, if they're going to get drafted, it's going to be late. My concern is, though, are you really solving the problem with an undrafted rookie or a 6th, 7th round pick? You'd hope they can come in and help, but KT Leviston was a 7th round pick. But the guys they identified are Jack Conley out of Boston College. He's a guy that's played interior offensive line, but they think he could swing out and play tackle perhaps. Dalton Cooper out of Oklahoma State, and Ezra Pohl out of Washington State. And of the 3 guys, that's the guy I think I like the most. He did play tackle, did not allow a sack in 498 pass blocking snaps. So, he might be a guy the Rams could identify late in the draft or get him in as a free agent. I'd still have concerns about that position now. There are some free agents out there I think they could go out and get, but maybe they love Warren McClendon and KT Leviston. maybe that's the deal. Or maybe they bring back Joseph Noteboom. And I know a lot of you are ready to move on from him, but hey, be careful what you wish for. We do not have depth along that at those tackle positions, and Noteboom would be a decent guy as an emergency tackle, especially on the right side. And hey, Kaiser White still available, and I think it was SB Nation that brought him up as well. The Rams, in my opinion, Omar Speights could end up being a 3-down linebacker, but Kaiser White definitely would be. And I think it would be a good add to bring him in. I wouldn't be surprised if the Rams are contemplating that. A guy we've been talking about here on the podcast for about 2 months as a potential add to this roster. If they were to bring in White, they could go through this draft without drafting any linebackers, in my opinion. Without White or a similar player, they're going to need to add another guy in the draft, I think, for sure. And, our quarterback situation, if you have any doubts about our situation, which you really shouldn't, some of you probably are not in love with Jimmy G as our backup or Stetson Bennett as our number 3 quarterbacks. Well, if you're feeling that way, hey, look at the Giants and what they're dealing with. Jameis Winston and Russell Wilson as their quarterbacks. Man, that would not throw me. And actually, if it were me, I'd be hoping Winston is the guy. I think he's a better clubhouse guy, I think, than Wilson. Wilson, maybe an overall better skill set. Both of them getting up there in years. But, man, how deflating is that? You make a run at Matthew Stafford, and you end up with Winston and Wilson. That's all I'm going to say about that. So let's get into our most underappreciated players for the Los Angeles Rams across their history. And, I'm taking a wing at this. And in the comment section, feel free to let me know where I got it wrong, where I got it right. And I'm no particular order here, saving some of the best for last. But for offensive linemen, you think about the great guys we've had at this position. There are just so many great offensive linemen. Jackie Slater, to start with, Dennis Hara, Charlie Cowan, Joe Schiavelli, Andrew Whitworth, and then even if you're talking about the greatest show on turf, Orlando Pace. Everybody talks about him being the key, the guy that made it all work, and I'm not going to disagree with that. But there was 2 other guys the Rams brought in 1999 on the interior, Tom Newton and Adam Timmerman. Timmerman, a free agent, came over from Green Bay. And those 2 guys, man, did they solidify that interior? Yes, they did. And I'm going to say Adam Timmerman is the guy that needs to get more love, a key player, a key guy in the greatest show on turf. And he didn't get a lot of awards and recognition when he was with the Rams. I think, Ram faithful knew how important he was. But hey, a shout out to Adam Timmerman, one of the forgotten members of the greatest show on turf. And man, what a key ad that was. The Rams nailed it in so many ways in 1999. Torrey Holt in the draft, Adam Timmerman, Newton, and the trade for Falk. Geez. And add in this guy named Kurt Warner wasn't a bad move either, although I don't think they really thought that one out. So what's next? Underappreciated defensive linemen. And this is another one that's a little bit tough to talk about. Some guys came to mind. And the difficulty here is you have defensive ends in 3-4s, and then you got the edge rushers who technically aren't defensive linemen. So you get into the linebackers and defensive linemen. It gets a little messy. I considered Grant Wistrom. He was my honorable mention along with Leonard Little, but I went with a guy that was where was he drafted? I forget. I don't have it here where he was drafted, but it was extremely late. And a guy that went on to have an incredible career, and that would be Larry Brooks. And he played on some great defensives in that era. played in between Fred Dryer and Jack Youngblood for a while, a two-time first-team All-Pro, uh, two-time second-team All-Pro, so he's in the Pro Bowl 5 times total, and played for the Rams for 11 years from 1972 to 1982. And when you play in between Dryer and Youngblood, this guy's doing all the dirty work, and I don't think he gets the recognition he deserves. One of the great draft picks in the history of the Los Angeles Rams, Larry Brooks. Next, we're going to move on to tight end. And the Rams, this is not a position the Rams have had tons of great players. They really haven't. Tyler Higbee, solid tight end. They had Bob Klein and Bob Boyd back in the day. Gerald Everett had a moment. Ernie Conwell, he was a guy we all loved. But there's a guy that I totally forgot about. You start looking through the stats and the annals of Rams history. What about Pete Holohan? And this guy, he played 7 years with the Chargers, had a really good career, then came over to the Rams, just 3 years with the Rams, and he had 159 catches for over 1,600 yards and 7 TDs. Those 7 TDs he had with the Rams matched the total he had with 7 years with the Chargers, and his total yardage was very close to that as well as what he had in 7 years with the Chargers. And he was also a very good blocking tight end, and a guy that I totally dismiss oftentimes when I'm talking about Rams tight ends. But this is a guy that deserves some recognition as one of the great Ram tight ends for sure. Now we get into the cornerback group. We've had a lot of really good cornerbacks: Leroy Irvin, Monty Jackson, Pat Thomas, Jalen Ramsey, Todd Light, Dre Bly. And there was a guy that played in 2 Super Bowls for us that we tend to forget about. And he certainly wasn't a great cornerback, but he was a solid contributor for several years for the Rams, and that's Dexter McLeon. Played in both of those Super Bowls against the Titans and against the Patriots, and was a significant contributor. Had 20 interceptions in 6 years with the Rams. So this is a guy that, shout out to Dexter McLeon. Probably not in the top 10 cornerbacks in Rams history, probably just outside of it, but a very good player nonetheless. What are we going to move on to now? Underappreciated linebacker, and this is where it gets a little bit dicey. Outside linebackers are thought of in a different light nowadays than they were back in the 70s. And there was a guy we had in the 70s that was technically an outside linebacker. And he played alongside Isaiah Robertson and Jack Reynolds and Bob Brzezinski for a little bit. And that is Jim Youngblood. And he played on some of the greatest defenses in the history of the National Football League. And I think he had a little bit to do with it. And I'm kind of torn on Jim Youngblood. Is he overlooked because of the other Youngblood? Or would we not even remember him if it was not for Jack Youngblood? 2 Youngbloods on the same defense. Really odd, but he was a very good player and solidified that defense. That defense was so good. This is a team that beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 9-0 in an NFC Championship game, and he had a great defensive line in front of him, really good core of linebackers, and Jim Youngblood, a big part of that. Hey, I'm just trying to say Jack Youngblood was not the only great Youngblood on that team. Jim Youngblood, our underappreciated linebacker. Now, when you get to the wide receiver groups, man, let's think about this. Who are the great Rams wide receivers? Isaac Bruce, Torrey Holt, Henry Ellard, Tom Fears, Elroy Crazy Legs Hirsch, Flipper Anderson, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, and one guy that none of you are going to name. I don't think any one of you have said the name Red Phillips, and he was a second-team All-Pro in 1960, 3-time All-Pro, and and led the NFL in receptions in 1961. And he is ninth on the Rams' all-time wide receiver list. A guy that he had a great career, and if he was on another franchise or two, he would probably have his jersey retired. But unfortunately, there were so many great receivers that came just before him and after him. Jack Snow, I left him out. But Red Phillips is a guy that we don't talk about, just gets overshadowed by all these great Rams wide receivers, and that's a little bit of a shame. He was a very, very good player. Now, underappreciated special teamer. This one, I kind of surprised myself with what I found out. I was looking through the great punt returners, Leroy Irvin. Obviously, I think we all are quite aware of that, though. The great punters, Johnny Hecker. He's certainly not underappreciated. Kick returners, guys like Tony Horn and Ron Brown. And then I got to looking at some other the kick returner stats specifically, and one guy it really surprised me, slipped by me, but lo and behold, Benny Cunningham was a great kick returner for the Los Angeles Rams between 2013 and 2016, returned 95 kicks for an average of 27.1 yards. Wasn't a lot to get excited about regarding the Rams in that period. So maybe we just didn't notice, at least I didn't. But an average of over 27 yards per return, not too shabby. And this is the stat I'm trying to figure out, or the data point, I should say. His longest return, 102 yards, but he did not return one for a touchdown. So I'm assuming he took a kick 5-6 yards deep in the end zone and didn't quite make it to pay dirt. But Benny Cunningham, man, did not realize this. Maybe I realized it at the time, and maybe we've all tried to erase that era from our memory. 2013 through 2016, not good times for a Rams fan. Now, who's our underappreciated safety? I went with OJ Atogwe, and this is another guy that timing was just bad for OJ. Played for the Rams from 2005 to 2010, had 22 interceptions in 6 years, and he was just a solid all-around safety. I consider Dave Elmendorf, but I think us old-timers appreciate his play. Nolan Cromwell is certainly not underappreciated. Hey, maybe Eric Weddle should be in the mix, but I stuck with Otagwe because a guy that was just, like several Rams during this era were one of the best players at his position, just did not get the recognition because this team was just kind of horrible. But OJ Atogwe, one of the better safeties in the National Football League during his tenure with the Rams, got absolutely zero recognition. Now, who's our underappreciated running back? Well, we've had some great ones, and most of them have gotten the recognition they deserve. Eric Dickerson, Marshall Faulk, Kyron Williams may be on the way, Todd Gurley. But, Ram fans love and appreciate Steven Jackson, but I don't think the league and the NFL fan base in general does. So I'm going with Steven Jackson. Man, he was a warrior. I've talked about this guy so much and maybe too much, but if you're talking about underappreciated running backs across the league, across the NFL in general, it's got to be Steven Jackson, not within, the Ramily, as we like to say. We all get it. We all love the guy, one of the greatest running backs of his generation. If you can make an argument, he was the best considering the teams he played on and what he got done. The Rams' all-time leading rusher. And if you asked a Pittsburgh Steeler fan, who's the Rams' leading rusher of all time, Steven Jackson's name might not even pop up. You ask a Bears fan, a Packers fan, a Buccaneers fan, none of them would probably even consider Steven Jackson in the conversation. But hey, here's a clue. Steven Jackson, top of the list, one of the greatest running backs of his era. What about quarterbacks? Now, a lot of Rams quarterbacks are probably underappreciated across the league and even within the Rams nation. And one guy I considered, I'm going to give out an honorable mention here to James Harris, a guy that is overlooked. And he was the victim of, probably wasn't treated as well as he should have been by the coaching staff there as far as giving him opportunities, early opportunities in his career. Really had to fight for his chances. Once he got on the field, he was very, very good. But I'm going to go with a guy that came a little bit later, right after Kurt Warner, and that's Mark Bulger. And another guy that was extremely talented, surrounded by a questionable supporting staff for much of his time there. I mean, Torrey Holt was still there and some other guys, but for the most part, this is a roster that was really depleted, and he did not have a very good record as a starting quarterback, but he averaged 237 yards per game, the number two in Rams passing yardage on his career, behind Jim Everett. That's right, Jim Everett, followed by Mark Bulger. And his teams that he started for, just 41 wins with 54 losses, but we just kind of dismiss him as just an okay quarterback. He was much better than that. He was very good. Didn't have that pizzazz as a quarterback, maybe a little bit boring at times. But when you look at the stats, I think Mark Bulger is not appreciated for the talent that he had. And you can't really blame him for the shortcomings of this roster. Is there another quarterback that could have lifted this team up and maybe got them in winning territory, maybe push for some divisional titles with that roster? Maybe so. Maybe some of these elite quarterbacks, guys like Matthew Stafford, but don't hold that against Mark Bulger. He was still pretty darn good. He is my underappreciated quarterback for the St. Louis/Los Angeles Rams. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Tell me in the comments where I blew it, guys that I overlooked. I'm sure I got some wrong. You go through this over the history of the Los Angeles and St. Louis Rams, it's easy to miss guys. And there's maybe guys that I'm underappreciating because I'm unaware of them. So let me know, and we'll revisit this another time maybe. Out here from Rams Up, we're going to have Scott Richmond on, by the way. We're going to do some draft analysis and throw in a little mock draft next episode, hopefully. And we'll have another roundtable coming up here real soon. Out here from Rams Up.